One God to bliss, nor the world's supreme guide of beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans, you, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When I was supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With pure bodies formed supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain. Fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner the best, supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of the lamp, an illusion, a drop, a dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning and clouds, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the foe of false, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, foreland sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I take refuge until I am awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Oh yeah, again, Dixon.
Oh yeah. Oh, I understand. Oh, tiene que arreglar cosa. Ore ta kan shi song ba ye chen da tan ba la na me cha wa ten chen de ba cha. Si tomba ta la de 야, 어다가 해서 가서 오래.去年도 그 굴론대식 싸움을 담고 열아. 어디인데 단단 단단 알아줘. 최초발이야. 내진 참마다 때 tenji 참마도. 걔나는 이제 출래야. 최다 맞아 마부 열도. 것이 가서 오래. 심지어리야 세계rin 것이 아쳐서 마을 써봐. 근데 요구요. 됐어다. 최대한 산지 좀 된대. 지den지 감르치네. 산지 지den도 감르치면 돼. 빼고 뭐라. 개발 망보고 자동 제대 산지 지된 걸 배요 말이야. 이나 다른 것도 산지 지den지 감르 배. 당외서 이제 개발 맞추네. 단다. 산지 그 sombe 최가가 만노아. 자상랑 냠술랑랑 유예배. 어디 두껍질이야 걔네. 밀리 개발시 치토도 봤디. 단다 안 돼봐시 개발 치마. 신디 집을 단다 많이 봐. 개발 치마 편지 단다 돼봐시 제구로. 교치마 단다 돼봐시 해들려. 담부 최주배 때 신디를 도반내시 교치마야. 최주배 리딩 개발시 사담미 때 개발시 치토구로. 내송라서와 교황년 발음 매기에 덮시려고요라. 뒤던달이야. 심지어 시야 대원들의 동해면도가 입에 심지어 건드지네하고 소화체나 기도 종계시인데 사도 도서로 근데 섬을 마다하지. 콜린너가 전에 동해 연구를 섬네. 시야를 소화파 진리지 펜바주베 최대 제베네 기부 총이 최세 사다 미고바 톱지 최주도요라. 대야 첸딜의 사부 지부 미기와 많이 받죠. 통만면에 사셔베 시야를 소화체발을 소변 미기에 줄래야. 니 샤파체 어떻게 전에 기부 총이 최다 대체도 최주베네. 그노전에 기부 총이 문도 나다 미고바 톱지 최도 최시거라. 어디지?
So, here, to begin with, paying homage first to the Buddha as the unsurpassed teacher for seeing and based upon his experience, teaching us dependent origination. So here at the beginning of a teaching, it's very important to set our motivation. And right now, we should recognize that we have this kind of precious opportunity in the life that we have, but also having met with the teachings of the Buddha. So there are many different religious teachings and teachers, and there are some, for example, who might teach something that like harming animals is dharma, is the right kind of practice, who might teach harmful practices. But we have had the good fortune to meet with the Buddha's teachings. And the Buddha having come into the world is something that is incredibly rare. And although we didn't have the opportunity to actually meet the Buddha's teachings remain such that we have the ability to interact with them, to take them up into practice. And so right now, while we have this kind of life, a human life with all of the capability to practice the Dharma, and we have met with the Buddha's teachings, we should strive to make this meaningful, to use it for something that is meaningful. And so at the very least, we should ensure that not just thinking about this life alone, but we have to take future lives. And so to ensure that we gain a good rebirth as a human or a god, we make efforts towards not falling into the lower realms by recognizing first that whoever it is, other sentient beings have feelings. They aren't just like sort of dirt or stones or something, but other sentient beings feel pleasure and pain. And so whoever it is, we should try not to harm them. If we are able to benefit them, that is good. But at the very least, we should avoid harming other sentient beings. And this then with the aim of gaining a good rebirth in the future, combined with the practice of purifying our negativities, not just the negativities that we committed in this life, but we have accumulated countless negative actions of killing and so forth in previous lives. And so making efforts to purify those kinds of negative actions and in turn accumulate positive actions through the practice of abandoning harm, this is the first level of motivation.
Yeah. 어디 가서라. 일이 날이야. 어딘데 삼르산에 교치망에서 미지어도 하다미 최주배 때 개발시 도했던 달이야. Ni shen la tsuwa pangpi yin sam. Chen di la pangpa tsamme kyo nga ma nam so. Shen la tsuwa mangpo che war se. Tizu kanga la shapa che ne. Sem liya niri me che na liya. Mi kiwa chu ngangi pangpa. Kiwa chu la ngangi jungiri cha su na. Ki che liya ne. O ta. Tada mi kuban te ya. Mi son la tu de kiwa sangpo de. Che tu be ten tu ruwa de. Ta kiwa ne kiwa ju de. Tada mi kuban che tu be ten kibar che che tobar cha sam. Yina ya ten te ya. Mi son la tu de. Ten tu kiwa yinpa ma to. Kwa dunga ji rang shi che. Kwa de. Kora si tu le dan nyamu be shawan tu chu ne. Kichi. Pumbu ndole che bala rawan me batala. Ne kubatala kora pa se kora duwa se cho. Kora yinpe se. Le dan nyamu be wangi. Rala rawan me ba pumbu ndole che ne. Dunga nyong kubatala ten tu tarwa chi che kuyo sam. Ti che do ne karchi ulis ne. Ti ju de. Nyamu re to wara. Nyamu ku wangi ne. Le kiwa dan mi kiwa sa su ne kwa kuyo wara. Mi kiwa le sa su ne. Nye son ki kiwa le sa su ne. Ten tu lata me le kiyo wara. Ti de nyamu ku wangi sa be le de. Dor kuyo wara pang kuyo wara. Ti de zang ngao nyambe. Nganzi di nyamu ki tso de re sam. Nga sam rawa tu chuwa jeba. Ti wangi ne nganzo ngai nganzo konzo tak cho ta shen cho. Ti wangi semje la ya chakdang rirab si ni ke. Nga bu la ya chakdang chi sa re ni che. Ti wangi ne le sa so na kwa ki ki ti pang kuyo sam ne. Nga nganzo konzo sa ro. Nga ke chado jenshim sa ro. Ta tezo la kyantu tene. Kwa le kyantu taba chi che kuyo sam. Te che do ne nyamu liya nyambu tene, kyantu tene. Niri meche na la nyamu choro taya, kondu choro, ngaje choro, chado choro, nganji choro taya ke. Tabshi chige na, ni kiawa chima kaso re. Kiawa, koya kiawa le tarwe, kibun ringi samlo kogu yara. Owa ti chi so.
Mhm. So then for the being of small scope on a day-to-day basis, for the sake of gaining a good rebirth, they try to then abandon those kinds of negative, harmful actions towards others to benefit others as much as we can. And those kinds of negativities that we have done in countless previous lives, we try to purify and confess those negativities. And one gets to a point where you're sort of naturally drawn to abandoning those non-virtues and engaging in virtue in order to be able to ensure that you get a good rebirth as a human or a god. But even if we should gain a good rebirth as a human or a god, although we have avoided the lower realms, it is still a rebirth within samsara that is in the nature of suffering. This kind of birth that is taken up under the control of karma and the afflictions is going to be in that nature of suffering. So long as we uncontrollably have to cast off our aggregates and take up new ones due to the force of our karma and afflictions, it is in the nature of suffering. So recognizing that, someone then gives rise to this thought, I need to gain a definite freedom from this cycle of rebirth. And what is it that is causing me to have this kind of cycling in samsara? Well, from engaging in actions, when we engage in virtuous actions, we can gain a good rebirth, and non-virtues lead to lower rebirths. But so long as we are creating karma, and our karma is in turn driven by our afflictions, we will continue to uncontrollably take rebirth within samsara. So the root of this is really the thought of I. When we have this grasping at an I, a self, and then all of the various thoughts of like mine and my side and the other side, we have a sense of attachment to our own side and aversion, hatred for the other side. And due to this, all of our various afflictions arise, like pride and jealousy and anger, resentment, hatred, and so forth. And so recognizing that it is from this that all of our suffering comes, there is this thought of, I need to gain a definite freedom from this cycle of rebirth due to karma and the afflictions. And so, on a regular basis, I'm going to strive to reduce those afflictive emotions, or my attachment and my anger and so forth, and eventually get rid of them completely, gaining thereby a freedom from that cycle of rebirth. So this, in turn, is liberation, freedom from that. This is the kind of attitude of being a middling scope.
Oh yeah. 다 대지를 삼로 거네. 다 라지부 거할래 타르바체. 렌도 타르바체. 근데 삼로 탄디사. 소소체디 파말라 소바. 대줄이야 집어 잠바다 싸워 요르다. 예부 요르와. 대줄에 삼로치에 마다체. 소소치부 동엘레 타레 삼로타는 마루아데 삼되어라. rāng kua kua nā shi kōnzō ngā yī sam chādāng dā wāndu shiāwān dā kyūru kiwa tōmā mē bā nē tē tū māmbū chi nyō tā tā rī ngā dzō pātā mā chi 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 dāwa rā chōng chi tē tē rā tī ndē kōnzō lī yā sam lō chi mā tā rāng chi bū tōngā lī tā rū sam lō tā nā mā rā bā rā sam chi tē sō yā tōngā dā tē wā lā chi tōng kē chi bū rā sam lō kō wā rā tī ndē kōnzō chen tī lī yā nē mā 제가 같이 마르셰발에 소바스다 마디 상마탐제 전체수도 인도시거라 디모데 냠도 파르셰바세라 년도 셰바 조보셰바 라게 사상을 붙이နေတာ부다 보모셰발서 신들 라라카르 제슈이나야 어디 삼로탄데 테나시 신달파 총바차이로 데데 터조 동엘레차와 탑시우레 삼제 삼로탄에 마시 텐데 텐소레 소바테 삼다 테네 테 삼르타도 자테 쳔데 치부게 티 마레 테다 년제 망부요도 쳔데레 년제 망부요라 테즈 참마 삼르타 다 테나시 저 통마 메데 교왕아마시 단당 배치로 테 인지메지 삼르 개침부라 교야 삼르탄도 자 소소 풍부 제도를 마도 남시 때다 다되게 저 통마 묘한데시 나다 메데시 때도 담에다 요대로 어디에 교와 치마야 이런 것이 보시 봐 저의 매버지 풍부 제도를 류 제도를 마도 가사디 샘디 로데요라 어디 다른 거 삼다고라 대인들은 교와를 통마 메두자 샘제 셴다시 친디년제 상마 교와 삼제도 고르게 되고 말어 교와 대가마 밀리게나 야카와게나 던드리게나 다음에 봐 교와를 다음에도 소소히 바다마다 니다 니둘러서 봐 네 제벌은 네 마셔서 문제 로가 제에서도 하고에도 기집회병 마시면 봐도 탐제란데 좋아요 셔시를 삼다 탐제 마셔 발라서 봐 근데 란데 좋아요 게 진짜부에 봐 삼다네 대 탐제 란데 총바 코아코알 때도 텔레타워 자고요 삼 심지어 탐제 동일에 때도 타와 지리아 로바치 통되게 라교 군세에 내 군대지 가사시 줄고요 삼 교육고시에 연대지 교육고시에 연대 군대지 가사데 탑대 실험이가 야르게다니 차고라 탑 잡아다 자와 셴뱅이 삼로 실업되네 대던달이야 동해대 제외 교가래 탑시가래 대주강가시 다음에 발라서 와시베시 탑대 실험 니부들이야 네네 라치부마이 버심제 탐제리야 니리메바야 동해대 제와다 탐색 준비 고만 터벌서 버텐들이야 네가 요수서 배고네 패통계시 지구요섬 근데 미 타는 물샤네 겨네 겨와 균이 깔래 겸네 산제지 고만 터버 지구요섬 근데 제시토가 지구요섬 근데 섬로 타네네 먼저 람메 고마름지 쭉 테네 타르발서 반 요모초로 타테네 탐색 준비 심제 탐색 때도 조배 산제지 고만 터버샤 대치도 추니기 요섬 그걸로 세담네 어디가 대치소
So then thinking about that even if we were to attain our own liberation alone, just to proceed to try to gain that freedom for ourselves without thinking about all of those other kinds of beings, those who have shown us great kindness. So to just think of ourselves is really sort of base. It's kind of a low way of thinking. All of these beings who have been so kind to me, they would continue to experience the sort of sufferings that arise from that grasping at a self and all of the afflictions that come out of that. And so rather than just thinking about one's own self, we should think about these other beings and wish to help them. It is based upon reflecting that these beings have shown us great kindness, thinking about them having been our mother and so forth. Now, usually we talk about recognizing them as having been our mothers, because the mother is a being that has shown us such great kindness. But we could think about all beings as having been like our father or our friends or those who are dear to us that love us. And so too, when we recognize the kindness that that being has shown us, we apply that to all other sentient beings, because again, in this context of Buddhism, it's very important to have the kind of long-term view over many lifetimes, such that we recognize it's not like in the way that we are, say, close to some in this life. It's not as though this is the only lifetime that we have had. Although we cast aside the kind of form aggregates that we have had, our mind will continue on. The mental consciousness has traveled through countless lives, and therefore we have had relationships with all sentient beings. We can't point to one and say they haven't shown me kindness. They have not been my mother or my father or this being that has taken care of me and shown me kindness and love. And given that there are countless lifetimes in the past, there's no limit other than not recognizing these beings as having acted in this capacity. We are actually have this kind of relationship. And therefore, if we recognize that kind of kindness, that great kindness that other sentient beings have shown us, there's a thought that I need to repay that kindness. I need to somehow benefit them. And although right now we may not be able to provide them full benefit, there's this attitude of thinking, well, may I become someone who is able to fully benefit all sentient beings, a Buddha who has eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities, who has the kind of knowledge of all of the points of what should be adopted and abandoned. And in order to be able to attain such a state, we ourselves need to engage in both wisdom and method to be able to sort of gain all of the skillful means as well as knowledge of all phenomena. This is what we are trying to pursue, such a state of perfect enlightenment. And it's not as though this is something that we can do necessarily in a single lifetime, but we need to have a very long-term kind of view, that lifetime after lifetime, in stages, sequentially gaining good rebirths in order to continue our practice. We are going to strive to attain that state of perfect, complete enlightenment in order to be able to benefit all sentient beings. So we should set our motivation like this for listening to the teachings, that this is our intention, our motivation.
Oh yeah. 다양 원부 가수래. 원부 넘보 그냥 삼일단주 전에 샘기주 현대제 용요라. 당생념지세 용도. 어디 삼일단주 건데 당거르세다. 파다마다 녀당니도 줘벌어 서봐. 대수 장장 멤버체로. 그 샘제 건데 지나 라 대완들을 동에 면도하래서. 현대 상마 대완들을 동에 면도한다래서. किंतु रंग तुम्हें से जे बशिंदु शेंगी तुम्हें दे सेगु दे सम रंग देवा दे तब जाए बशिंदु शेंगी देवा दे टुरो चेक दे तब गुजरे देवा संसे टुरो चेक दे सम ओ किंतु तांदा बादो सुसु देवा दे के छिशु चे रंग के छिशु चे रंगी छिशु चे शें यावर दो रो ओ तेले तेने कार्य योंगी जो के रंग के छिशु चे नाया 디 던달이야네 샬라츠와체 샬라토주 샬소바 강가께 강가테 티 총샤서 란진지들 껴투다셔라 란진지디 통만매원이 용어를 란 개치슈체네 따주 통만매원의 개치슈체를 다 타주대 야구를 시부지 차고 그래 개차야 요 말아 따티 란진지들 껴투슈디 티 제샤서 정말 매번에 제 단도가 저 신제벌 좀 버려 제 내가 제는 갖다 줘 과거 대가 말을 상계 서그래 상교라 어디도 자다 꽤간 거대서 꽤 치실지에 뒤쳐서 라니 진지 그것군지 고사는 싫어 라진지 되는 셴뱅이 좀 같이 붙이도 말에 밑종내는 싫어 종내서 소보 종에 나대는 숙심을 내가 지면 게 차그라 어디 내실에서 근데 삼도 아니라 다베트 저 동만을 삼단다 강가 노르샤삼 셴제 버리는 게 있나 오늘 전에 다 저기 들으셔서 셴기 전에 간장마도 삼네 다베 셴제 봐서들아 어디인데 라진진다 셴진진이 껴다 연연이 소소다 삼다 라진진이 그거 거를 셴진진이 연대 탐지 시리즈 다 진짜 다다 셴제부터 나 삼자라게 지슈지 첩들이야 셰게 지슈지 단다바도 라게 심부지 셴 야와도 첩들이야 라이 셴기도 야와도데 셴기도데 랑게도 뭐 삼다네 근데지니 답이 셴제베 장주기 셈로 심지어 탐지도 사기지 고바 토바 시작고도 삼 셴제번 좀 거야 근데 거네니 군우세 때문에 세버시우시안스 네게 군우 장주기 셈기 심베고네 삼단다 제여러 텐데스 투섬시네 셈버시우스탄데 야
So, there's also another way to generate bodhicitta that's said to be for those of sharper faculties. So, not just thinking about the kind of connection that we have had with others, of them as having been our mothers and fathers and dear loved ones and so forth, but just recognizing that in the same way as we don't want to suffer and we want to have happiness, all other sentient beings are the exact same. This kind of development of bodhicitta through the equalizing and exchanging of self and other begins with recognizing that our own happiness and others' happiness, like these are both things to be achieved, and suffering is something to be gotten rid of. And so, up until now, we have actually, due to holding ourselves as most important, and due to that kind of self-cherishing attitude, we disregard others, we harm them, we criticize them, we do things to put them down. And yet, all of the kinds of troubles that we experience are due to the fault of this self-cherishing attitude. This is the worst kind of fault that we can have. It is due to the work of our self-cherishing that all of the bad things come about. Like as it said, this self-cherishing attitude is the door to all fault, all bad things. It's described as well as being like a chronic disease. When you have a chronic disease, it limits your mobility, it limits what you can do. And so too, this self-cherishing attitude is like a chronic disease that we have had up until now. We have been totally mistaken. We think that our self-cherishing is giving us happiness, but actually it's the fault. It's the source of all of our faults and problems. And on the other hand, an attitude which cherishes others and values others is the foundation of all qualities. And so recognizing the faults of one and the qualities of the other, there's the exchange of our self-cherishing attitude with the attitude of cherishing others in the way that we would normally sort of neglect others. We now turn that towards ourselves and value and cherish others. And in this way, we are able to exchange those kinds of attitudes, and thus thinking about the benefits of cherishing others, we give rise to the kind of striving. I want to become a Buddha in order to be able to really fully benefit others. And so we should set our kind of attitude, our motivation along these lines with a bodhicitta motivation for listening to these teachings. So please, again, set a proper motivation.
뭐야 어디 뭐야 되네 더 땡겨야 로데 당아도 돼 참지 봐 어디 땡겨야 로데 단다 참마 거르셔도 와 단다 대 저대 봐 땡겨야 로데 참마 셔봐 라게 주의지 또 철라 밀루시스 어디 뭐 참지 될려 있어라 참마 셔가 와라 참마 셔도 단다 가도 기불랑도를 주고 교육 써서 지대배 자샤 잡으시는 자 아니지 다르바도 탐지 쳔버 컨데이나 내가 컨데이 전에 그 참매 지수장 내가 지금 와라 이제 않고 사도 밀루에 참마셔야 돼 기부 밀루와 기비 가사주 가르사물도는 소소리아가 만노르체 제토고요레세 디제게 그 규칙고라 텔레 참마시고라 다들 가셔서는 치료받아 줘서 원보도 참마셔라 미게 원보 나의 원보 내 원보 제 원보 류지 원보세 원보 숙제부터 참마레세 딘데샤에 지어라 딘데 원보 숙제부터 참마마레세 남바체나 참마셔야 돼 시바질 샤고레세 원부 수제부터 멜로나 시리즈 되어라. 명화들 버저 송예대 차례니 시바가 디바신기와라. 나의 원부들의 수피 자드 수샤 에 텔레폰 시바 파지기와라. 어디 누가서래. 저도 참아 말해세. 참아도 시바를 샤고래세. 밀루의 시바실이야. 세시를 봐. 유추세 파시 통배 든데스 거라. 원부터 멜로나 신드시라 텔코 차르데르 바도 코랑 시에치요 말에 또 텔레테니 시바게니 신기오라 티인데 참마시야데 기부 밀로와 강게 제수타네 기부 내가 참마 마노르 제체토 그래서는 직대단 직대는 내가 자와가리나야 어디 밀로에 시바데 제도 그래서 시바셔야 되게 소부 차시 뒤도 두바테 쪽에 펜토 그래테 시바를 로고 지그래테 코티 가르소래 참아 말해서 참아도 세시를 베시발 샤고래서 디시거라 어디질랍나.
So here, then picking up in the text, we are on, I believe it's page 79, where it says, in this prasangika system, that which is called valid cognition is not mistaken in regard to its principal phenomena, its object of engagement. And so here, when it comes to, then this section is talking about valid cognitions and what are valid cognitions. So whether it comes to something that we are doing that is sort of a worldly activity, it follows after. We're able to accomplish our work based upon having a valid understanding, a proper understanding. And so too, even more so when it comes to things like liberation or the state of omniscience, whether it is a worldly or a kind of transcendent phenomena, it follows after. We are able to accomplish it based upon having a proper valid cognition. And so there are those that would assert that the physical sense powers are valid cognitions. However, as it says here, the prasangika's systems is it's a consciousness. So the physical sense powers act like sort of mirrors. They reflect the various objects, like we have sound and our ear consciousness, or visual forms and our eye sense power. And that is like a reflection that is then passed on to the consciousness. So according to the prasangika system and others, the consciousnesses are what are valid or not. Something that is like a physical aggregation of particles, that's a physical sense power. It doesn't have the ability to be a valid cognition, in the sense that a valid cognition has to have that capacity of being consciousness, of being clear and knowing. So while the sense powers can reflect various objects, they're sort of a necessary tool for our consciousness to arise. It is not as though the physical sense powers can be determined to be valid or not. So here, again, when it comes to any sort of mundane or transcendent phenomena, it is based upon that valid knowing.
Oh yeah. 또 딩산도 전에 배제 원불에 컴퓨터도 전에 강가 따따따따 수라고도와 지지도 코드 세마에 메시지 지르대. 김미 남주 시바가 바샤샤네. 시베 되게 자가지고라 그걸 지서샷도 시제마도 코란 장경 수도도 주고 코란 장경 수래가 시시와 말아. 바스네 시베 삼을다네. 네 디디 세시도 다 디날 다다다야 마무멜로아시 토야르시도와 어디나 원부 참아네 뜻어 참아를 보라 뜻 참아 말이 뜻시바데 미 남주 시럽기 내가 제거라 야 뜻이다.
So these days there might be those who say like computers have valid cognition or are valid in this way because they can like compute and do all of these things in an accurate sort of a way. But really it's not as though the aggregation of those particles is what makes that happen, but it's the intelligence of humans, consciousness used by humans to create that then allows for that to happen. So we couldn't posit like a computer as being a valid cognition.
Oh yeah. 다단다 디 우마 텐주에 루루 체메콜 셰비오라. 딘디 텐주에 루디 체마셰바. 랑게 유유지 쪼여쳐라 밀루신세. 랑게 유유지 쪼여쳐라 밀루아텔라 체마셰고레세고라. 지단 그 텐주에 루체네. 셰바 록셰이나 체마 마잉게도 상마 밀렘지 셰바 되지나 고 디레되어라. 랑게 나와레 체마이시라. 밀렘 땅데르 가지고 간거 노르레데 이네 그 니세어 두사 밀람리아 카르토토 티 간거 땡기도 와마제 티 땡중게데 밀람 셰바데 고 또데요라 나와데 셰바 코라 카르 나와텔 체마이시르 셰바 참마 랑게 나와라 체마이시라 이네 그 랑게 나와라 체마이 버sam지 체마샤위 오마레 유지 쪼데 삼르다사 타다 쪼데 밀로아제 티 체마 틸리아 체마이나니 체마샤구라 오 제두가서 랑게 주의지 쪼여쳐라 밀루신세 지천에 유타라 진대실에 주베 네바다 뎀바실라 사마르조바야세 지당의 전에 그 뒤도 주바 뒤도 줄이야 유타라 사마르 주베 네바케요 말와 데바다 마오바다 지 동반에 들에 사물다는 그 유튜브 말와 시바되게 사물다는 시럽되게 사물다는 때전에 유타라 가르이네 그 주베 네바 요아라 어디서와 tinde지고 계속다 셰바데 내체마샤고레서 세시르고 셰바 대한 유지 쪼들라 밀로아 마노라치레 체마샤고레서 거라 뭐다 저번에 뱀보스네 뒤도 두버들 뱀보스기도 와 뒤쪽지 원보 남네 지찬의 유타 마부실라 그 원보도서 수레지네 무마이나 가도다 입디 차르기라 나의 홍보인의 자대 차그를 마도 현다게 차그 말와 그래서 유상말의 주변 지천에 혼내버게 요 말해서 오라 시바인의 세시를 받으라 아니 그 유타라 상말의 주변 내봐요 아래다 유통게 요하라 어디서 오라 원부 남네 지천에 유망부실라 주변 내봐 매배 세마를 미롱하라 손라하세 되나 유세시를 별로니라 세마를 저거바 인데에서 유세시르베 시바텔리아 참마샤고르마도 왕보다 저쪽에는 참마 말해서 거라 뒤에는 뒤바도실라나
So here, then we are talking about in the Prasangika system, what is posited as a valid cognition. So in this Prasangika system, that which is called valid cognition is not mistaken in regard to its principal phenomena, its object of engagement. So here, when it comes to what makes something a valid cognition, for example, we need to distinguish between being unmistaken with regard to its principal phenomena, or the object of engagement, and being sort of valid with respect to the appearing object. So, for example, like with some wrong consciousnesses, or for like in a dream, we have various things that appear to us, and those consciousnesses that that are conscious of those various appearances, those appearances are something that we can remember later. We can have, it is valid with respect to the appearance that came, but it's not valid with respect to the object of engagement or its main, its principal phenomena. So for something like, for example, a dream consciousness to be valid with respect to its appearances does not mean that it's valid with respect to its object of engagement. So here then, in general, they also posit as valid cognition the ability to engage either a subtle or a coarse object. The physical sense faculties generally do not have the ability to engage subtle objects, and therefore it is therefore said that they are unsuitable to be valid cognizers. So here, when it comes to, for example, like our our visual consciousness can only take on color and form, and our audio consciousness or the sense faculties themselves can only perceive color and form, and our audio consciousness can only perceive sound and so forth. But it is our consciousnesses, like our mental consciousness in particular, those consciousnesses that are clear and knowing, that can take either or can engage with either a subtle or a coarse object. So we have the distinction between consciousness, being clear and knowing, able to be aware of something, to take an object, and that which is material, the physical sense faculties, which are composed of atoms and so forth. They, again, that subtle physical sense power has the ability to sort of reflect an object, but it doesn't have the ability to engage in subtle objects or like different types of objects, whereas a consciousness has the ability to engage with various coarse and subtle objects.
그래. 담만 뒤치려네요. 근데 뭔가 밀람 단디서라. 밀람리야 미래지 투거지야. 소소 추키르르시 밀람 땅이나. 니 세드자 고 밀람디 남자 쇼자 고 세버시 땡기도와. 저서 시바데 나올을 세마에 베터로와. 다 밀로아데 마레데 추군에 기요 말아가죠. 밀람 땅에서 추군에 기요 말아. 저서 그 유지 쪼들을 밀로아레 메도 나와대와라. 그래서 세마 말에 랑게 나올을 세마레. 유지 쪼를 세마 말에. 단다 딜 세마 이메데 유지 쪼들 세마 이메 샤고레 소소 어디지 라베셔. 어디지 랍셔나 타셔.
So again, the difference between something being valid with respect to an appearing object and valid with respect to its principal object or its principal phenomenon, its object of engagement, we could take the example of like a dream. If in a dream you meet someone, or say you imagine being like carried away by water, you feel a fear at that consciousness is valid with respect to the appearance of being carried away by water, but it's not valid with respect to its principal phenomena or the object of engagement. And so the kind of appearances being valid with respect to an appearance doesn't make a consciousness valid with respect to its principal phenomena or its object of engagement.
Oh yeah, that's 로마도 왕불이 참아셔주요 말에서 롱디 공장교라 돌려서 디다르 뭐보다 세미신서 지도로 왕부되다 셈셔 왕부 미완 나와 정화를 소바태서 참아 말해서라 세미신서 뭐니지 뱀불 로마데 고랑 장신기 뱀불에 뒤도 주바래서라 뒤도 주바래서 겨와다 미겨와도 로마데 나는 로마데에서 그 겨와다 미겨왔는데 그 말만 미완 나와 정화서 아니 쉐다 최지적인 남들에 된 도일로와 단 남들 그 롱장도 최지적인 남들에 맨들로네 참만이서 원부터도 참만 되고 말해셔라 치료가 시작하시 맨들셔라 참만도 가르샤오르네 세시르베 로니를 샤오르에서 거라 맨들로네 참만이서 란다 가르서 론 코날 참마샤고 했던다 가르스나 란다 도제 뭐보에 줄라 대중이돼서 기불랑도라 주베 규소데 로그치그레스 거라 셰바그치그레스 세시르베 셰바데그치그라 미와데 고 강가체 토고 말도 고 멜론나시 차데라 차라레 때는 셰베 바르기도 와 셰바가 디젤라니 이지 셰바가 삼르다는 담데 강가 이 마무시야 용도 와 텔레 때는 마무시에 토고도 와 맨들로네 참만이세 줄라 대소인데 기불랑도라 주베 주의 소데 셰바데레 제나네 시럽데로 되기와잖아 시럽데 제바치게 시럽데레 랑돌리 주베 규소데 임베치다 유남전에 타데베 로에도와 타데시르 대연한데시르 셰발이야 유지 남베다 남바지 샤르소나 좋아 유지 남바 타데베서라 로네 로에도와 타데 유남베다 통도사 디치 토니야 삼루치탄 팀 멤버싱그리야 삼루치탄 팀 멤버싱그리 로리야 유지 샤네니 유지 찍밀로아 찍여나 다텔레 삼루탄에는 담데 마보셰도 와티 강가 로그셰도 거라 셰바게 세시르바 디소다 유남전에 타데 유지 남바 타데 유카가 임바되게 텔레 셰바가네 삼스타네 아니 유메다메다 나르마시바 마부사바사바 마부싱에 요데스고라 유남전에 타데 로에 또바 타데시르 대유나데 유시르어서 유토베 셰바 직 밀로아 직 요나 다 텔레 테네네 티네 다 간데레세 도 체리를 지나고 유지 밀로아제 때는 삼르다는 담바다시 강가시에 두고 와라. 어때니 체를 지나고 메다바도지 소우르지 시엔 때는 삼르다네 메다바다 지도 동해와다 내주 가르시고는 마보시에 와라. 밀로아직 매바지 강가 논저 장이네 밀로무선데네 사바시에 개와 마라. 자 밀로아시 시바치가 유지 남바다마다샤야 예제 ene samludane be yunda amenda shenia yaje kache ne troya do ba hoti yongro reso te na de yeseros satu milo sheba de yona yuji namba meda shage ene yu to be sama par ma sheba yaje do reso she de yaje do ne namba da she ja cha che do reso ora o de ba de sidona.
So, thus, it is necessary to posit as a valid cognizer the mind that illuminates and knows its object. So, here then, as a source for this, it says then from the King of Concentration Sutra states, it is like this. These sensory faculties are not valid cognizers. They are naturally material and ethically neutral. So here, the sense faculties, our sense powers, are material. They are not to be posited as valid cognizers because, again, they are material. They are something composed of atoms and don't have the ability to be aware of an object, although they act sort of like a mirror. It's something that reflects its various objects. It doesn't have that kind of awareness of it. And then in Dharmakirti's commentary on valid cognition, he states that mind is the valid cognizer because it is the principal thing that engages objects to adopt or discard. So here, this is the main, the mind is what is a valid cognizer in the sense that it is the cause of developing wisdom, the cause of developing understanding. We know all kinds of various objects. It is the thing which engages in various objects, and based upon that understanding, we then engage in adopting certain things or discarding certain things. Mind is the principal thing that does that. By engaging in such objects, we then we engage in actions on the basis of that. And then it says, because there are different kinds of objects, they are cognized by different kinds of minds. So we have, the mind has the ability to understand various different kinds of objects. We are able to know things based upon, like the mind has that ability to taking on a particular object. We can say, oh, it is this, or oh, it is this. We know them as different things. And based upon that kind of knowledge, again, once this undeceived mind exists, this ability to have a continuum of valid cognition exists. So it is based upon that kind of undeceptive mind of valid cognition that we can increase the continuum of that or develop the continuum of that. If we come to an understanding, this is impermanence, this is selflessness, and so forth, and engage the mind with those various objects, we can have the ability to improve our understanding, develop our wisdom and our thinking, because it is possible to engage with minds in this way. So again, once this undeceived mind exists, the ability to have a continuum of valid cognition exists in the sense that we can develop an understanding, increase and develop that.
Oh yeah. Da gondo doda uma jupara. Yida miki sheba so chema member sungbane lo de da shiri yu kala ya chema member sungba mayin jese. Sheba de da yu rang chenyi je chuba rangone chuba da yu ji de konani la yu ji de konani da nelu tadula chema member sungba yin shin sidwa. Gondo long dal rosarita. 미다 나와 나야 체마메 제단 류다 이견 체마메 게데 원부터 다 세나 파괴람 예술의 지식자식이 donal chi songudwa otina shi uma chugwa te tuzunal songara oti kapsu sheba tuzu kanga chama mare songudwa ti chita yu kangla ya chama mai songyo mare shera ni chama me songbate kene kare sina kondo uma chugwa chama memba songbate biswara yu kangla ya nelu yu rangune tuba nangi wara ngazo yu kande chitona rangune tuba kura rangwante tuba re ko kura ngune yobari su nangi wara ngune chene yu kande chene ko chashe mambu chen deji tsoane ene ngazo le pata ni chi tongu yora mada yu kura chi ki rangune nga rangi yu singeda rangshin ki rangi kongwe tsuk tuba sigda tak suba che suba sigda tak suba che suba sigda chi kaba yosine te yosu zugu sa yebe sorichi nangidowa o tisonda ko tende yona ta cheni niye yogora ume tawe ka samambu chege do ati ribe side kari chego sne rawa to tuba yona kona yuji ngone ngarang yo se rawa to tuba chi yona ta kadi yin si cheni niye yogora chege wara tene tak ba sam tanya do yoba dele cheni niye ke yo mare tanya pa ta ne ko ke kunde chi tosona o pige 강바르다 비글 나가르다 수다서나 다게 반지버를 마다 가게 나가르 세계라 기군식이요 고식이요 토대식이요 세트를 제주세요 말이지 그냥 당연히야 다게 뒤버치를 침발해 또그 따섬 세트시라 또그 딴 다가리 마다 기가 말 당연히도 여바들려 때네 따봤으면 샤고 그래 쟤는 이 요거 말해 라옹은에 지 여바 얘네 다 가들어서 그런 거네 얘나 차시에 마음부 되는 말에 되는 말다 가그래서 쟤는 이해가 거와 어디인데 나라도 쉐바가 유컨데지 토나 랑와도 주반난 거래 미기 쉐바에나 나의 쉐바 내 쉐바 이기 쉐바 강걸이야 어디 나라도 쉐바래 랑와도 주반 나와 나시 아니 텔 세마 마레세 랑와도 주바티 너네 통고여레세 계시거라 티 강가 랑와도 주반 나와 나시 템바예나 ene ngarazo sheba kanga tembare dura chamare dura nelu le chamare dura ne nelu tadule chamare odi nelu no na shingi yura onne tuba rawadu tuba nelu su tuba tele chema mare segore no na shi tele chema yena ne yura onne tuba raw shingi tuba tada mo tuba re dura ene ngarazo kanga nelu tadu de tongare dura tele lagwe nelu mere tagara nelu tadu yingora o tisungora o nikolesa yuji nelu tadu la chema mayimbar sungba yinshin se o tibatu chikuna.
So here then, continuing in the text, it says, the statements from the sutra and from entering the middle way above regarding the mind and visual consciousness and so forth not being valid cognizers are not saying that these minds are not valid with respect to any object whatsoever. So here there are quotations like from the King of Concentration Sutra and so forth that describe our sense consciousnesses as not being valid. And here there's a quotation before, I can't find the exact quotation he gave, but that will come below where it says, if these sense consciousnesses were valid cognitions, of what use to anyone would the noble being's path be? So here, when it comes to those visual consciousnesses and so forth not being valid cognizers, it's not saying that these minds are not valid cognizers with respect to any object whatsoever, but they are saying that these minds do not validly cognize the ontological status or reality of their objects or their objects' establishment by way of their own characteristics or establishment in their own right. So here, when it comes to the way that objects appear to us, the object appears as if like established from its own side, autonomous, independent, even though this is something that occurs due to an aggregation of many parts coming together and so forth and us designating it as such. things appear to us as though they like existed in and of themselves, as if they could withstand analysis or scrutiny, as if it's like there is something right there that we could just point to and say, this is that thing. But it isn't the case that phenomena actually exist in that way. So if it were the case that phenomena had such a mode of existence, if they really did exist in the way that they appeared to us, as though they could withstand scrutiny, could bear analysis, or like sort of existed in their own right, then when we searched for them, we should be able to find them among the various parts. Like if we're looking at a house and we have and we're looking through like the windows and the doors and the walls and so forth, we should be able to find something that is that house. But we can't actually find such a thing. But whatever is dependently designated, that is its level of existence. You don't need to search beyond that. It is sufficient to say, like, this exists as a dependent designation. We don't need to be able to find something that is really existent from its own side, but rather that level of existence as being dependently designated suffices for it to function within the world. But if we assert if various objects existed in the way that they appear to us, including the way that they appear to our senses, then we should be able to find that thing, right? That has that kind of autonomous, independent existence. And so our sense consciousnesses, all of our consciousnesses, are mistaken with respect to the object being autonomously existent. They can be valid with respect to the object, but still not have an understanding or be valid with respect to the ontological status or the reality of their objects and their object's establishment by way of their own characteristics or in their own right.
Oh, yeah. That they tune is you got to show the tattoo Nelula Chamamari, Rangwini to one hour, Nashitella Chamamari somewhere. Chidan Chamamari somewhere, Marisora. Tandilia Tanda Lung, the Doi Lung, that Tezuchene, Keva Mamboge, Tendesonge ora, Suseki, Migdana, Yiji Sheba Sobachama, Danji, Nord de Vicades, Loshit, Chamamaris, ora. Goddessing you, maybe chili, you have a jade. Manzu Tonde at the Zukanga, Kunzu Chumbere, Dezukanga Yoma Rese, Tongbani Shed, Dezukanga Mebe, Tantali Shevura, the Sheduza, Gilung, Keshibuchi Tangore, Manzu Sheba Kanga Chema Marese, Tanya Chamanji Betuzukanga, Tindin Desu to Asigora, or Tati Marese, Tinelu Chema Messigora Mato. No, Nashi, now there you want to Tubatilla Chema Marese. Sungera Mado Chidante Zulichama Yomara Sungu Maris, Tike Shimbuchi Shayora. No teacher left China.
So here, what is being said is that these are not valid with respect to the kind of ultimate nature, with respect to phenomena existing by means of their own characteristics. And so there are those that would say that, well, this is all of these are not valid at all because they're sort of imputing some kind of existence onto something that is non-existent. And so they might want to assert that our worldly valid cognitions can't be valid because they're not valid with respect to the ultimate nature of phenomena. But here it's important to distinguish that even without being valid with respect to that kind of ultimate nature, our worldly valid cognitions can be valid. And so there will be a very important quotation that here comes to support this.
Oh, yeah. That they tune is in the Darishaba. Simjan Namji, Sutra La Sokbese. Sutra La Sokbese, Nam Rangi Senji Trubata, Rangwine Trubat Shenjin, this Jengi or Wangarazakange. Tetaki Musumya, Tetar Trubanas, Musumlaya, Miki Sheba Tazuatin Zinda Sigmarte, Naya de Nande, Rangwine Trubanangi or Machine Nashi Chishatule. Round to one gender Sigomar, Nangi ore. Jane de Garesu, Tati, Rotation Jigora. Nan de Ducoti, Round, Nan de Yora, Korang in the Yorich. Chuba Sinji, Tedaki, Musumlaya, Teta Chuba Nayase, Teta Nawa Tatu, Temba Mayin Bese, Nawa Nashi Temba Trubio Mara, Azul Nawa Nashi Temba Trubio Mare, Nawa Tenal Ranguni Chuba Nante Yora. Oh, Tisonda. Temba Temba Mayin Bese, Luam Sumbadase, Lua Rese, Sumba Rese, Kunzu Temba Shichawason, Tisonda Dele, Sumbase, Sumber Chuba, Kunzu Tembase. Kunzu Tembase, the Takashi was in Kunzu Sidura. Rang Wisum do Nava Lotela, no one I shit Temba Meduna, Kunzu Tembase ora. Rang Wisum do Tonga Lotela, no one I shit Temba Duna, Tendam Tembase ora. Tongban Wisum do Tonga Lotela, Tinsi Omar, Temba Nagi Omar, Temba Trubanagi Omar. No one I shit out to Buare, Tongban Wisum Togo Lotela, Tongban Yite, now a tattoo to Buare. The Temba Trubanagi Omar. Tendam Tembasa, Lotendamba. Tongban Wisum do Togo Utila, Rang Wisum do Togo Lola, now a tattoo Tembare. Kawa Bomba Suda to the Rexella Sobangaraju Machine Nashita Yiki Shabatu Nandi. No one has it ever matter. You rangone to Banagi or the Rangone to Batolane Marwa. Take a Kunzu Tembas, Kunzup Ser, Kunzu. What did you love, Sena?
So, living beings conceive phenomena, forms, sounds, and so forth as being established by their own characteristics or from their own side. They appear to living beings to be findable even by a direct perception, but these objects are not true as they appear. Therefore, they are called truths for a concealer, falsities, or deceptions. So we all sort of have the appearance of phenomena existing by way of their own characteristics. And these objects, they don't exist in the way that they appear. We all sort of grasp at them as existing that way, and they appear to us as if they had that kind of existence. But it's not. So here, when it comes to the way that our various sense consciousnesses and so forth, they hold various objects like form and sound and so forth. And these, although they appear to have, again, that kind of true existence, they don't actually exist in the way that they appear. So they're called truths for a concealer, or falsities or deceptions, in that they are sort of falsely established to the mind that is perceiving these various appearances of true existence. The kinds of objects that they take appear in one way, but they don't actually exist in that way. Whereas for example, to the mind that is directly realizing emptiness in that context exists as it appears. There's no appearances of true existence, and therefore it is totally non-deceptive. But when we have the various kind of objects of our senses, pots and pillars and forms and sounds and so forth, all of those various objects appear to have kind of true existence, even though they don't actually exist in that way. And so therefore, again, they're not true as they appear. Therefore, they are called truths for a concealer, falsities, or deceptions.
Oh, yeah. Do less long to Kunzu to Nimunam Yus, Kunzu to Gotam Jayus, Tundam to Govanam Ranshin to a mess. Yes, Ranshin mess, so. Oh, Kunzu to Nimunam Yus, Tundam to Ranshin mess. Ranshin Mela Khan Nora, then the Kunzu Tembayas. Ranshin Mebale, Sutra to Rachel Sobanam. Ranshin Mebalia, Ranshin Yevan Norn Zinging Lote, Ting all the Tempas on the Kunzu Tembase. Lo Kunzu by Tinzing or Tempas Aminji. Don't let it up my Bena Kunzu Tembase, Kunzu Sing the Lo Kunzuba, Lotel Shat, Tinzin Shat, Ting all ya, Rangun to Trubata, Tembatruba, Tembarako, one even Zingiora. Kurang all the Tembaramata, Tembamarwachida, the Norn Zingiora Church, the Kunzu Tembas.
So then from the Descent to Lanka Sutra, it states, these objects exist conventionally, ultimately they have no inherent existence. That which is mistaken with respect to the lack of inherent existence is that which is a truth for a concealer. So these phenomena, they exist conventionally, but they don't exist ultimately. They appear to us, again, as though they had that kind of inherent existence, although they actually lack that. So to this kind of conventional mind, to that perspective, it is it is mistaken with respect to that true existence, but it is true in the sense that this object can be it appears as though it were truly existent to that kind of conventional mind. So to that perspective, that's why we call it a conventional truth, is it is a truth for that sort of concealer or for that mind, because it is mistaken with respect to the fact that these phenomena, although they lack inherent existence, appear to have such inherent existence.
뭐야, 개대 스타디 뭐를 말로서. 개대 수라 소베 유테 남 수제주를 잘라 소베 유테 주시거라. 심지어 남제서 알아서 통도 사시거라. 랑원의 주바 신제에서 랑원의 주바 나게 여러 신게 여러. 그냥 알아 차시 소소를 차시 그냥 아서 통도 아서 랑와치 랑원의 코라 연나를 세우도 마도 풍부가를 때니 바딱 바삼 들랑아시기 삼사자로 심면도와 아서 nga랑원의 지여바 생기도와 nga랑원의 여바 지여는 아니까 봐요서는 쟤네 라이브에서도 삼기도와 이제요 말하고 근데 저랬으네 풍부가를 때니 딱 바삼지 모래를 잡아치더니 나한테 잡아치긴 루비 때기 semba kibu도 ki부면도 새를 샤워를 마도 들려놓아서 샤야겠면도 와 풍부돼서 그 자와치한테 따라 자와치고 샤워도 와 들려 자와 마셔서 풍부가 가야 많이 받치 자와친 게 산다시겠면도 와 그래서 자와치버들 따라 자와치고 샤워도 와 그래서 대sol에 때에 다 샤자 그래서 자와치버들 따라 자와치고 샤워라 풍부스가 뭐 많이 게 로가리 짓거나 다 여나 근데 속을 내가 집에 따가 잡아치고는 누구 말하고 속보다 다 백화관이 이거나 다들 로가지나 근데 속을 잡아치고도 따가 잡아치고 누구 말아 맨날 미기 씹어야지 다에다 씹어 다이나 근데 속을 잡아치고도 따가 잡아치고 누구 말아 속을 도시는 미르비지 세이나 도시는 미세거리나 샘기 도시는 미세요 말아 그 잡아치고 샤통을 그것도 다시도 저거 쪽에서 집장자 매사 대소를 저치버도 다가 저치버 샤고도 때내 딱 봐스티라 수다 시번이 요라 아주 얘도 소부지 요라 되도 좋지만 이게 시버세리 자신이도 등이라 때내 딱 보셔요라 가사데 수와 말에 소부 요라 수 말에 시버르에서 시버 말에 양고 사바지 투른 대민도 지시라 수시 가야 많이 배두셔시기도 니 소두자야 공부 사와서 두고도 니가 내가 지도 다가 자와서 샤기도 야 다들 만다 셔보시 야 어디 지금이야
So here, living beings conceive such objects as form and so forth to be established in their own right. And these objects appear to exist in their own right to their visual and other sense consciousnesses. So here, the way that objects appear to us, both to our sense consciousnesses and to our mental consciousness, is as if they had that kind of autonomous, independent existence in their own right. So like, for example, with the thought of I and the self, we don't think that we are merely designated upon these five aggregates. There's a sense of like there is an I that exists from its own side, not dependent upon anything else. And yet, when we think about it, like when we try to search for where that I or that self is that exists within the aggregates, there's nothing that can be pointed to that is that self. So when we think about it, like if when our aggregates do, like if our form or our aggregates do an action, we say that the I does that action. The self is doing that action. And so if the self were somehow like apart from the aggregates, were somehow separate from the aggregates, then we would lose all logical connection there. You wouldn't be able to say that the self is doing that action when the aggregates are engaged in that action. So there can't be some sort of separate self. But if we try to point to something within the various aggregates, like we say the mind is the self. Well, then say you pick up a rock with your body and you throw it at somebody and you kill them. Well, then we couldn't say that the self did that because the self is the mind and the mind didn't pick up a rock and throw it at somebody and kill them. And so there would be all of these logical fallacies that would ensue if we were to try to assert that, say, the body were the self or the mind were the self, but rather it is independence upon this body and mind combination that we designate the self and I. So this is something which is, we usually term it to be a non-associated compositional factor, something that is neither form nor mind, that is this self. But there isn't something that we can point to within those aggregates or outside of them that exists, that is that self, that exists in its own right, although it appears to us as though it did. We don't think of ourselves as being just a mere designation on our aggregates.
Oh yeah. Take the solar so be you te nam sutra to rechala so you to sola. Simjen nam ge rangune to bar shen se. Rangune to bar nage yore to rangune to bar jigi yore chera. Miki sheba la so bar rangune yoba nawatar. Dana de tar temba yona se. Miki sheba la ya sutra to rechala so da bude. Rangune to bar nawana shi temba yona se gora. Rangune yona. 다자게 미기 셰발라 소바라 셰바 남비 수소 수소 내루 tonla 치더 여바시 통하인 베서 수소 라문에 주바 나와나시 라문에 주바 예나 코라 내루 고네도 통하라 라문에 매바이나 라문에 똥바도 내루 타도 차거라 라문에 여나 라문에 여바도 코라 내루 고네 드려더라 근데 존도 위요마 존도 요마르 땅고네 템바 통구요래 유코랑은 내줄라 가리 임바디 치마 지신 통구요라 뒤나 아니 가르스나 미게 셰발라 소바 내루 tonla 치더 내바시 통하 임베세 셰바데다 솔라 소바 랑게 천니지 주밤 랑운에 주바 통하더니 템바 연구스 통하나시 템바 연구레서라 되나 수소 랑운에 여바더니 뭐게 내루스냐니 랑운에 여바데 내루레도라 랑운에 똥바 내루레가 말해 기는 내루 치마 지시 통하래 당가라서 가게 랑운에 주바래 랑운에 주바 통하래 이 템바래 내루 통하래 랑운에 주바데 내루 샤도라 이 내루 타도 통하래 세우라 통한주에 미기 셰발라 소바 원비 셰바 남기 수소기 대코나니 통한주로 되네 수소기 대코나니 통한주레스 자 미다 나와나야 체마 메세 되시거래 랑운에 주바 통하네 신이나 에네코 미기 셰바 나야 셰바 내 셰바 셰바 이기 셰바라 소바 되서 간가 세마레도 그랬지 가르 내루 타도 세마레도 그랬지 디네루 세마 마레스 거래 메다 나와나 세마 메시였던다 디레스 거래 다던다 셰바남 수소지 데코나니 통화를 주시했잖아 메게 셰바라 소바 데코나니라 세마 힘고라 아세 드네 나도 셰바 강가 데코나니 내중원에들라 당래 지들 내바 타나시 통고요라 데코나니로 당래 가데 여바나시 가서 통고요라 당가랑 저 통하는 내루 타도 통하래 다 코나 내루 타도 다가래 텔레 대박해요 말아 대코나니를 참여 대단한 집안남 통만 매번에 뭐왜 내루 지신 통시다 집에 소소 교가라 저 통만 매번에 뭐보다 내루 따다 통되어래 다가 내수 타도 통되어래 다랑은에 주바이네 다랑은에 주바 내루로 수대대로 저서 간저 통하나 시대로래 걔는 가지 내루 타도 통동가래서 저 통만 매번에 뭐그 내루 통화인신 텔레 콤바이베네 뭐그 내루 타도 텔레 통만 매번에 콤대로 이제 따도 되는 텔레셔지 콤대요라 걔네 따고 교용도 요마래서 콤바이베 대다 뭐그 내루 지신 지신시에 박별라면 있다네. 내로 타도 떠야 된다. 박별람 떠야 된다리야. 얘네 태바체 삼바체 콤바체 저가 최주의 제도 타로 토야 제도 랍도 중앙을 써봐 개와 주에 태서 강감하고 고구마 도와서라. 뭐 내로 지신시에 박별람초라 대바체바 다음에 말해서 오라. 야, 다 뒤버듯이는 망도셔서 다음에 디말로 신때지 못한 거죠. 다음에 봐 주대에서 그래. 대시다 마셔. 다다래. 다음에 봐 주대에서 그다 안간에 시제내로 친지 말로 봐. 친지 나내와 시제내라 친지로도 진배 로다 녀몬바 남세데 다 친지로 쟁게요 말아. 친지 말로 봐 통되어라 쟁게요 삼겨라. 다 친지로 간거요 말이셔라. 아니 내내 내로 탑도 통하셔. 타로 토바다 텐데시도 다 전국에 놓아서 그래. 녀몬바 남세데 고에 풍부 뭐시 렘바메바 고알에 타로 치면도 된대래. 그 타로 톱되어라. 팀마다 토베게요 말하다. 빠에게요 말은 아주 통되 따다로 랑운에 주베 다요래니 빠지 랑운에 주베 자요래 랑운에 주베 니요래 때려 샤바데 디디오라 랑운에 주베 샤바요라 그 녀모 빠에 매버래 타로간에 타로 토고 고도 하시고 어디버도 실라나 뭐로셔서다 야
So again, phenomena, objects appear to ordinary beings, and we cling to them as if they were existent in their own right. So living beings conceive such objects as form and so forth to be established in their own right. And these objects appear to exist in their own right to their visual and other sense consciousnesses. And so if it were the case that these were to really exist in that way, then our consciousnesses would perceive forms and so forth in accord with their actual ontological status. In that case, these consciousnesses perceiving form and so forth to exist in their own right, or to be established by way of their own characteristics, would necessarily be perceptions of what is true. Then forms and so forth existing in their own right would be the ontological status of composite things. And so here, if it were the case that these objects existed in the way that they appear to us, to our sense consciousnesses and our consciousnesses, as though they existed from their own side, and that were the actual way that they existed, then it would be the case that our sense consciousnesses and so forth being valid would mean being valid with the respect to the final nature of things. As was said above with the quotation from the King of Concentration Sutras, where it says that the eyes, ears, nose, and so forth are not valid cognizers. This is referring to their not being valid with respect to perceiving the ontological status or the sort of final nature, the actual nature of things. Because if it were the case that our sense consciousnesses were perfectly valid with respect to the actual nature of things, as in things appear to them to exist in and of themselves by their own characteristics from their own side. And if our sense consciousnesses and so forth were absolutely valid with respect to that they were actually able to perceive the ontological status, the real nature of them, and there is no nature then beyond that, then, as it says, our sensory consciousnesses would then perceive the reality of form and so forth, and our sensory consciousnesses would necessarily be valid cognizers of the reality of forms, sound, and the rest. Were this the case, then ordinary persons would have accurately perceived the ontological status of composite things from beginningless time and would have become accustomed to that. So therefore, it would be senseless for them to seek the path of noble beings who accurately know the ontological status of composite things. So if it were the case that that our sense consciousnesses and so forth were valid completely with respect to the nature of various objects, and we see that nature, we directly perceive that nature with our sensory consciousnesses and have been habituated to it since beginningless time, then there would be no reason, it would be senseless for them to seek the path of noble beings who accurately know the ontological status of composite things. These ordinary beings would have already eliminated the afflictions and misconceptions with regard to the ontological status of phenomena and would not need to later appropriate composite things, that is the aggregate of cyclic existence. So if we didn't have any wrong consciousnesses, if it were the case that saying that our sense consciousnesses are valid meant that they were valid with respect to the ontological status or the final nature of phenomena, there would be no need to seek out any sort of higher path, any kind of mental development, because we would be seeing the nature of things. And if it were the case that we were seeing the actual nature of things, and that nature was that they were existent from their own side, objectively existent, then all of our, say, afflictions would also be objectively existent, such that we couldn't ever get rid of them. There would be nothing that we could do to change those things that are existent in their own right or by their own characteristics. And so too, we would have eliminated any sort of afflictions based upon a misperception of the actual nature of phenomena, and would thus already sort of be liberated. You wouldn't have anything to do. So those are the various kind of faults that would come if we were to assert that our sensory consciousnesses are valid, and valid meaning with respect to the ontological status of phenomena.
Oh yeah, not the lonely wall Yadaya riba chuchu bala sangombo ludu kirwa. Ane karisondo sana chidar chibe tagwa shins chiba sose kyo ngaranzo ge le rangone chuba thon tagwa na shingone ina sigora. Ngobo gete tenjo na thon na shing temba ina sigora. Ngome namdar to tene ngome namdar to. Oh ngobo tene nyomola saba mebe tarba top do re se tamune. Kange mende chuchi se. Tarba toba member chuchi de yoma ko ngo nelu ngone ti thode yora ta na shi che dan dole ja ke de wombu de da che ne phagwe lam ji sule chi shi cha so de me ke wombu na wombu ne wombu la so ba yi ji wombu la so ba kanga chema ma re sa ta le so ro ba wo ti so ye tanda ka re sna de ke de wombu de da yu ra won de to ba le chema yena ne phagwe lam ko ba le tanda yo ma re se Nelu tadu tonde yores kora. Shida uma juba le jas. Ketin jikden sema yina nesin jikden ba ngazu kyuji miki sheba naga sheba la sobaro. Tezu kanga sema yina sigora. Ketin jikden sema yina ne jikden tingi tonga pasha jis. Te kona nile sema yina se rangune juba tonga tatu sema yina sigora. O di keba sigora. Tezu tamal kaji tuzu sena di sema mare chidan sema mare se tubyora. Titanda mare se rangone truba toana se chema mare te yena ani pagwelam kumbala tanda yo mare sombi ware sigora keba khasheda sena chema mare chema yena no mini pagwelam kumbala tanda yo mare se tanda re sigora kade jiden chema yena ni jiden tingi toe jiden je te kona ni toe jiden tingi toe pa she pagwelam shenda ji kol koba yo mare sigora Pashangi Chigu Pagwelam di Chisha, Lumbu Chamaraba Minus, Lumbichi, Wambu Shebala, Yiji Shebala Sobateda, Waburandu Tubala, Chama Mayin, Wabinelu Tadula, Chama Mayin Setadare. Yatiba de Chilaxana.
So, here, then, again, being liberated from cyclic existence, why would they not like it? If we were already sort of had valid cognition of the actual mode of phenomena. And then, as verse 3 of Nagarjuna's 60 stanzas of reasoning states, if things were actually true in accordance with ordinary person's thoughts. Here, this is referring to, really, it says the sort of childish, those that, like us, perceive things as being existent from their own side, and so forth. If things were really true in accordance with that, then as they would have no things, as in no aggregates, why would they not like their liberation? As in, if you already perceived the sort of nature of things, their mode of abiding, then wouldn't they then already be liberated? Wouldn't they already sort of be happy in that? And so here, there's a kind of a misunderstanding. And again, as we saw above in the King of Concentration Sutra, if these sense consciousnesses were valid cognitions, of what use to anyone would the noble being's path be? So if some scholars misunderstand valid as being valid with respect to the sort of final mode of being, that ontological status of phenomena. So they don't know how to distinguish like the kind of valid cognition that is valid with respect to a conventionality versus something that is valid as meaning with respect to its final status or the way that it exists. So here, consciousnesses, according to this system, can be valid cognitions, but not necessarily valid with respect to the way that things are. They're valid, but not in terms of the mode of abiding of phenomena. And so too, Chandrakirti's entering the middle way states, if the cognitions of worldly persons were valid, they would see reality. So what would be the necessity of the noble being's path? What would be the use of their paths? The cognitions of the foolish are not suitable to be valid. So if it were the case that ordinary childish beings, sense consciousnesses and so forth were already valid in the sense of valid with respect to the ultimate mode of abiding of phenomena, then what would be the use of an Arya path in terms of pursuing that kind of higher understanding? So it says, if one asserts that the cognitions of the worldly are valid and that they see reality truly, then one must accept that they have eliminated ignorance. For this reason, the cognitions of the foolish are not suitable to be valid.
뭐야. 근데 음악 주바가 랑들레스고라. 나와잡아 음악 주바가 치타데 롱창성 티랑들레스. 대대지 랑들레 지데 세만이도 개랑바야바다. 지데벨로 참마데 유랑원에 주바를 참마이나 다 내루를 참마를 두거라. 내루 타도 티를 두거라. 내루 타도 참마를. 걔네 너무방식도 배고 말으셔대. 괜히 대코나 통화에 배쳤어요. 랑원에 주바를 통화에 참마이나 괜히 대코나니 뭐가 내루 타도데 랑원에 주바들에 그래. 랑원에 뭐 주바데 내루 말을 말해. 랑원에 주바데 그 내당원에 들으는 거라. 걔네 코란 내주 치마 지신 통화를 두거라. 아니 내루 타도 통화를 두고래서. 대코나 통화에 배쳐 말이바 빵빵에 버려. 마리바 빵바도 그래서 마리바 요 말아 고통 강가 때문에 되어라 친질로래요 말아 마리바 빵바에 버려 그래서 뒤에 름보네 세마리바 마이너 뒤에 름보 교기 아니 미게 셰바 나가 셰바 미게 왕볼라 소바 이기 셰바라 소바 소마 요랑원에 두바 통하나시 텔레 세마 마리 테 노네 통하래서 진나와테 친질로 통하래 마도 티 통하나시 세마 말해서 셰다야 땡이네 미라 소바다 코네 네베셔스 미게 셰발라 소바테서 테코나 녜베레 유랑원에 두바 나와 전시 도비오나네 네 뭐네 주카이 바테 녜베라 파벨람 콘도 쉐버셔 파벨람 생게시 소소케올레 데베 파벨람세 세 저달라 수dim다 테바다 삼바 콤바체벌서 테메레서라 저 수dim다 테바다 삼바다 콤발라 소바 팀바스 팀 배수 숙심 붙여야돼 제부도 시아바 많이 받대 제부터 왜 그요 말해서 괜히 대다 많이노 시수 바다로스 오만 주관래 어디보다 지켜다.
So here, again, sorry, I read a little bit ahead. In Chandrakirti's then explanation of entering the middle way, his auto commentary, he says that if one asserts that the cognitions of the worldly are valid and that they see reality truly, as in a valid cognition is valid with respect to the ultimate final mode of abiding of phenomena, then one must accept that they have eliminated ignorance. If if their consciousnesses are valid in the sense that they are valid with respect to phenomenon's ultimate nature or ontological status, then there's no need to try to eliminate ignorance. Those are valid because they're valid with respect to phenomenons existing from their own side. And again, according to for this reason, the cognitions of the foolish are not suitable to be valid, as in valid with respect to that ultimate nature. Because if the seeing of something and seeing it as being existent from its own side, if that seeing like were valid with respect to that mode of abiding, in that, yes, that phenomena did exist from its own side, then there would be no need to pursue any kind of higher paths. So it continues saying, if you say merely that the eyes and so forth ascertain reality, then there would be no need for diligent effort along with its effect with regard to ethical discipline, study, reflection, meditation, and so forth, for the sake of cognizing the noble path. Therefore, that is not true. So here, although again, the eyes, the visual consciousness and so forth can be valid. They are not valid in the sense of ascertaining reality, because then the result would be that there's no need to make an effort to try to realize this noble path.
Oh yeah. 我们就过来讲是，每个样的准备同啊也我年的准备就是，但我不常嘛是吧？我不得在常嘛他们这里啊，准备同啊落雨去当，那样的不同啊落雨你有的时候了，每个样的准备同啊也落雨你呗，我你有的工作点不的等不你是有了，你的准备就是。 我不看这些呢，可能有的里啊，杨大伯同学落雨去的，准备同学落雨去，你真的要的是，当然那的要的是等待的，是吧？杨大同学干的听你的，杨大伯同学落东北人我送到东北落雨的了呀，等他们听不熟这些了，杨大同学干的太困难了，让我呢准备东北的是吧？这太困难了，等他们听不这些了，同学准备工作听不说是。 准备同样落雨同样给是吧？出这这这下来说吧，可能对工作点把这是我的，点把主办那个月让我送了，那我那些点把买呢，过等到7月的了，工作点把是有的些的，工作点把送些，写送不的，我不他们这了，他等到开始我的是呢，我不开把考去呀，等着送是有的，我不可能的要嘛的，就东把你的些了。 今工作点不点这个要嘛的，工作点不的买不下多了，这要嘛的，这买不的东不是嘛的，工作被我去要的，当然被我去，你我不可能那处理要的，我你呢真不就是个多，我不可能那处理的你真是得要的是个的，那这的了工作点不是个的，样的不同样了有的了，当然点不是个的，工作同样了有的了，工作点不是个的，点不你个南下点的这些。 送的工作的，等到要的是，等他们的要的是，等到过个了，要的是做呢。
So then continuing with a quotation from Chandrakirti's Entering the Middle Way, it states, all things bear two natures, found by correct and false views. So all phenomena have these two kind of natures, that which is the object of false seeing, and that which is the object of correct seeing. So here, when it comes to then those two, the object of those who see correctly is said to be reality, and the object of those who see falsely is said to be conventional truth, in the sense that all phenomena bear these two sorts of natures, that which is found by the mind, a conventional kind of a mind, and that found by a mind and the object of a mind that sees correctly. So, for example, a mind that perceives emptiness directly, suchness, ultimate reality, that it exists in the way that it appears. So it is referred to as correct seeing, and the object of that is then the ultimate. Whereas the kind of minds, again, so thus all in terms of the apprehending, thus all phenomena have in fact have two natures, ultimate and conventional. In terms of the apprehending consciousness, there are also accordingly two cognitions, valid cognition that realizes the conventional and valid cognition that realizes the ultimate. So there is in this system an understanding that the object so there are some scholars who are sort of like would like to say that emptiness is the only sort of truth, and thereby there is nothing else. There's no way to sort of posit the conventional as having any kind of existence within these sorts of systems. And so here there are, for all objects of knowledge, all phenomena have these two natures. They're not just sort of nothingness or just emptiness, but in the sense there is an ultimate truth, and then there is also a conventional truth. So valid cognitions are of two types, one that realizes the conventional and a valid cognition that realizes the ultimate.
Oh yeah. Shesung Batar started Chibada what in Jabajara. Shesung Bada Ngobo Tamje Talia, Ranging O Kunzu Wachida, Tadam Betemba Ninjin Net Yorese. The Yabana she Eugenia, Kunzuba Kora Sutra Sobatonga Lochida, Telechebach and Rangwin to Baton Shimba, but Tombani Tobe, Eugenie or this order. Eugenia Tetar Kunzuta turned them to with Samani Yoba Yenose. Then can you load the Samani Ranga Juiji Soyochola, Milu request Shila Jola, that can you Lulia, Tagin Lapsaiba, Juiji Soyochola Milua Seremado, Naola Sama Sheba Loshit to cover Ranga Naola Samaratera. Telayena Musum da Sheba, Penye, Samashi or Desera. Telayena Musum Che, Cheba Che, Penye Che, Lung Semasche. She or is so she said. The datu na musum da cheba chamanina do chetunga by so shas or debo to chiduna. Yeah.
So again, then all phenomena have, in fact, these two natures, ultimate and conventional. So you have objects of two types as well. Then you have two types in terms of the apprehending consciousness. There are also accordingly two cognitions. Valid cognition that realizes the conventional and valid cognition that realizes the ultimate. So moreover, as stated above, in this prasangika system, valid cognition is posited as an awareness that is not deceived with respect to its principal object, its object of engagement. So again, even when it comes to something like a wrong consciousness, that wrong consciousness can be valid with respect to the appearing object, but for something to be an actual valid cognition, it needs to be non-deceptive, unmistaken with respect to the principal object, the object of engagement. And then we'll get into the various, with respect to valid cognition, there are four types that they assert, including perceptual cognition, inferential analogy, and verbal testimony.
Oh yeah. The Tarea Shigebe Drebale, Milu Shebane Judena Chamani to Tonas, Judena Yako, Milu Achilia, Chamachamasik to Asira, Dina Shani, Shungi Kapsako, Chemenam Shayode Sungura Sheta Ase. Can they? Sheta, Gulu do Jutsundo, Nale Sosha Sira. Sheba that long time Tatin Rosa. Sheba Chamasha, Long Chamasha, Penny Jaggy Chamasha. Long Chamash, she Chamashi Soswa. Chebasan and Beauty Chebasa to Chebara, Long Chamash, Longital, then Jason Tabel, Longaten, Chipoya Shora. Penny Jessica, oh, Pala, Pamiti, Pamisa, the Palandra, or Esera. She did Rabuchi or the Penny Jessica. ninjeda cheba longi trubjeda cheba cherane longi kone trubya longi chema pe trubchawe pe kone pa din rabuchi yore se ya to ga ba ngusum jini le da wa ne ngusum chema shi yu se tenjue lu la sung go ra cheda chise le da chema shi le ji den ji ten do kwa jogba yin no shi sung ba ta ro se o ti bo ti chi to
So then again, with respect to valid cognition, there in the Prasangika system, you uniquely assert these four types as perceptual cognition, inferential cognition, analogy, and verbal testimony. And Je Tsongkhapa said that in brief, these four can be included within the two types of valid cognition, perceptual and inferential. So in his commentary to the 400 stanzas, Chandrakirti has said, in the world, an undeceived cognition is said to be valid. So here, being non-deceptive is the primary sort of qualifier of a valid cognition. And in Nagarjuna's Dispelling Debates, it says, there are inferential, analogy, verbal testimony, valid cognitions. Inferential proves a point with a correct reason, verbal testimony with citation, analogy with an example. One can respond with these and with perceptual valid cognition. So here, when it comes to the four types of valid cognition, we can have a perceptual direct valid cognition. We can have an inference in terms of proving a point with a reason. Verbal testimony is in citing scripture that is valid, or we could use an analogy like this is like that, using an example in order to prove a point, like this is like an oxen or something where we're giving some kind of an example to put forth a kind of understanding. And then one can posit perceptual, direct, valid cognition. And Chandrakirti's clear words also states, one establishes the knowledge of a worldly meaning with the four valid cognitions. So here, this is the way in which the Prasangika system presents then what are the four valid cognitions, or really the two of perceptual and inferential.
Oh yeah, chema da cheme sheje jogba te ase ta chema da cheme sheje se de rangwen ne trube chema she rangwen ne trube yu she tin de je ni sha go ma de se ora chema da cheme sheje jogba ya pen ju tu ju ge ten je de bar jo e sheje chi te le te ne ti tong ge chema ten je de pen ju chi chi le tu ne sheje de pa jo de ngombo re de yo na ti sheba de chema re jo ra chema de ngombo yin ba tong go yo za pa jo de ngombo yin ba sheje de she chi chi le tu ne chu de ma do tutu me ko se rangwa tu trube shema da shesha tende shagyo ma resti shagyo ra. Tele chiruba ga te shigdoa. Kiran che tamze ngo nye me shigdoa si nangba ge. Nganzu toki chikdi churu la sokwa tende namsha chama yo re se. Kiran namsha kanya che tu ma re se ra. Tele ya len kenda o te shema da shesha yo re se. Kiran na shi rangi ngo trube rangwa tu trube tende yo ma re se. Penchi tutu tenchi debar jo shema da shesha yo re se te len kya yo ra. Ke long de sure de ma o ta chama da sheje jogba te ya penje tu da penje tene shagba sambi yebe chama da sheje jogba yimbe se cheme drube sheje la range ngoni ji druba chi mego bar so de cheme drube sheje na range ngoyo druba chi ko de samte ko ma re se ora chiksele te da je penje tene druba yurki se chama da yona sheje te yure sheje de yona chema de chema sha to le se sheje de yona chema da to yuge chema da sheje ni ngoni je trubani yo ba mai no she so so o ti bo to chi to da
So, yeah.
no
This is kind of a continuation of the same meaning that has been that has come above, but as to the presentation of valid cognition and its cognized object, here this is not as though in this system one posits that there is a kind of a cognized object that exists from its own side. Nor does there exist like a valid a sort of subject that exists from its own side. So here, when it comes to the presentation of valid cognition and its cognized objects, this is done with valid cognitions and cognized objects that exist by being merely posited relative to each other and mutually dependent on each other. It is not necessary for an object that is established by valid cognition to be established by way of its own essence. So here, again, it isn't the case that a valid cognition is something that the subject or the object has that kind of existence from its own side, but they can only be posited interdependently in the sense of mutually dependent upon one another. As Chandrakirti's clear words states, valid cognitions and their cognized objects are established through the force of mutual interdependence. By virtue of the presence of valid cognition, there come to be cognized objects, and by virtue of the presence of cognized objects, there come to be valid cognitions. But there is no intrinsic establishment of either the valid cognitions or the cognized objects. So it is the case that it's necessarily that these two are mutually dependent. You can't have a kind of valid cognition of an object that exists in and of itself from its own side or autonomously, or a kind of subject cognition that is existent from its own side. But they can only be posited by way of mutual interdependence. They're necessarily not established from their own side.
Oh yeah. 더 신대도 단대 때문에 딱 맞으면 샤고를 스티셰비와라. 가르쳐도 신대도 랑게 뭐니지 신대를 맞출 게 아시. 신대이나 컴퓨터이나 가리나 다 집어와. 랑게 뭐니지 맞출 게 아시. 미기 시발에 신대 콜로다 미기 받아도 콜로다 밑에 서체 아니 다시 해서 통대도 근데 신대 콜로를 해서 받아오라. 신다 바바도서 신대 전에 대사 그거라 전에서 이제 차시 강샤로라 신대를 진진세 미리 셰바파 신대 정리되잖아 이제 셰베자 미실라 가나와 대다 실소나 대신대를 대신대도 와서 신대 대쇼세를 티쇼세라 진대라 그러셔라 텔레 강 신대 이미 가르신들의 콜로들의 들의 딱새게 제고 말이셔라 지내 다녀라 뒤통수 그 신대 대쇼가지고 요새 라그레셔라 대점지 신대 샤거라 이지 미실라 나와 대다 실소네 아니 대다래 강 신대 비마다 마셔 버세 대단한 대신들에서 이마에 제바가요 말아 지내 다녀다도 마셔 반디네 신대 오냠도 딱 봤삼지 견전디 신대레스 라바sam지 파수 미케 이나다 민도세나도 어디 자와 신경이 신대디 남샤 제사레스오라 자와 진리디 신대 주주 조바인베 견제 미게 셰바다 이지 셰바니가 신대라 멜로에 참아 조바이네 미시게 신대 통고요래 단예 신게디 신대레 가지고 티나로 요새르셔다 당에 미기 셰바다 이기 셰바니가 참말해서라 때네 딱 봐삼지 그 샤그여마도 뒤는 치카르에서 센 근데 남셔가 뭐라 지대 당에 떠디 어디보다 지주나
So here, then what follows is it says, take the example of a chariot. Here, this is talking about the kind of way in which things are existent as dependent designations. And so when we take anything, like say, for example, a chariot, we could take any kind of thing like a computer or whatever sort of object we want and say, although it is not established as a chariot by way of its essential nature, due to the appearance of any of its parts, the wheels, chassis, and so forth, to the visual consciousness, we apprehend it as a chariot. So in dependence upon seeing the various kind of components or parts, we see this aggregation of parts and we say, oh, that's a chariot. And so independent upon that, we then are able to designate this thing as being a chariot. And so for worldly conventions, things don't need to exist from their own side. We don't actually need to find anything that exists in the way that it is so designated. So here, when it comes to then also, our mental consciousness conceives as a basis of imputation whatever appears to the visual consciousness, and from that imputes this is a chariot without any analysis or examination as to what among those parts is a chariot. So here again, this aggregation of parts appears to us, and we designate, we impute, oh, this is a chariot, without examining any or doing any kind of analysis as to what among those parts is a chariot. But rather, this mere imputation suffices as the way to establish that a chariot is able to perform the function of transport. So even though there is, if we were to like search for within those various parts, the thing that is the chariot, we couldn't find something that we could point to. A chariot can still exist. It can still convey people from one place to the other. And that is the extent of the existence of a chariot. So this mere imputation suffices as the way to establish a chariot that is able to perform the function of transport. Therefore, both the visual consciousness and mental consciousness are posited as valid cognitions that are not deceived with respect to the chariot. So here, when it comes to the kind of way in which that exists, the visual consciousness, which on the basis of seeing those parts, and then the mental consciousness, which imputes, oh, that's a chariot, are both valid with respect to the chariot, although not, of course, the chariot's ultimate mode of existence.
Oh yeah. 당신도 탄예도 유주세. 탄예도 유다세. 탄예도 유세다. 더담바 유세니 요라. 탄예도 유세도 니르실 쓰요라 티셔요라. 밀루에 셰바테다는 지den지 탄예라 지다 낭시. 작바다로 주바 인지세. 단다 신대 탄예 세계 미기 셰바다 탄예베 이지 셰바 디디레세. 탄예니 조사 어때주세요라. 작바 지대나 작바나 실제 주고요래서라 대 마침발 지대나 작바나 시 마다 버셔파 차셔질 때는 명다고 많이 버셔 지체니 라네 등대셔니 다니다요 말해서라 대 마침발세 마다 마셔봐 다니다고 대 마침버셔 지체니 아니 디르 말해서 등대 다니시고 말해서라 대 침바시데 다게 디버시고래 대점을 샤고래 해서다라 마침발 신대 인로 지다리 마체 신대 인로 지다리 마체바 유라 주바 임베세 어디 다시 제바르 제 말을 건지되나 강타고 채셔를 때는 봤다고 좀 되겠삼지 직벌과 같이 버셔 그래서라 뒤선자 직대배 당에 셰바도 줄 가르쳐 그래서나 마다 마체바르 주고 셰바스 그래 마다 마체바르 주고 셰바스 지대배 탄예배 셰바스 그래. 지대 탄예배 셰바. 그러나 지대지 작바스 그래. 지대지 작바 지대는 다가 작바를 다가 차샤 그래서라. 지대지 작바 세계 세시. 대다게 유 신달라 속과 최대다라. 지대 탄예 딱바나 신다 강바 여러 어느 신동라 속과 민카르다나. 대다라 탄예지 왕게 여바시 그래서 탄예 용어 강바 지den지 탄예 용어 여버려 신단 지den지 탄예 용어 여버려 미다 따다 발라서 지den 탄예 용어 여버려 스티스 그래서 탄예 용어 여바다 똑배 따서 마시 그랬더라 똑배 차셔질 때는 티파디레스 라바 대sam지 예마에게 남사 침버셔 오라 지den지 그래서 똑배 따서 마셔들면서 똑배 강 따다레스 그 말아 그 여당 열로든 지den 탄예 지다도 똑배 차셔질 때는 밤밍 따서나 디디레스서나 러디디오 냠서나 왔다가 잠비 디버레스 거라 될 똑배 따섬 민기 샤섬 그러와 야 똑배 왕게 여봐 시장 소소소 어디부터 지도다
So then we get into how a chariot exists conventionally. So again, there's a conventional level of existence, not talking about the kind of ultimate level of existence. So these undeceived cognitions engage their objects according to how they appear and are upheld in the conventions of the world. They engage their object, such as a chariot, without analyzing its ontological status, without dissatisfaction regarding that. So here, when it comes to the kind of conventional existence of phenomena, the consciousness imputes a name, a designation on a collection of parts, like, oh, that's a chariot, that's a car, whatever it is, without analyzing the ontological status of that, and is merely satisfied with that. So therefore, they are called cognitions that engage without analysis or investigation, or cognitions of worldly conventions and what is upheld by the world, or sort of known by worldly renown. So this kind of, just that designation suffices for existence. It's not, again, and this is why their objects, phenomena such as chariots, are said to exist by the power of convention and so forth, because by mere conceptual imputation and by the power of conceptualization. So whatever it is, whether we're talking about a chariot or a house or an ox or a human, whatever kind of object it may be, in dependence upon a collection of parts, we have the mind that imputes, that designates, oh, this is a chariot, this is a person, this is an ox, and is satisfied with that, doesn't need to, like, say, find something with among the parts that exists in the way that we think it does, as like that ultimately existent thing. And so it is on the basis of merely designating on a collection of parts that suffices for this level of existence, or in terms of what is upheld by the world or worldly renown. And so the object of such conventional consciousnesses are said to then exist by the power of convention and by mere conceptual imputation and by the power of conceptualization.
Oh yeah, that did my motion. When I did then can't talk about Namda, talk back, can't talk about Nam Yover Joba the best with that of Walara. But then you then can't talk about that, you then talk back, can't talk about Tanya, can't talk about it. Sometimes you ever the best gora. That mind it take on your marriage. You then talk about Yin. Regret no, Tanya do about your marriage, Tanya do your sig marriage. Caress ne penang jidena nga rangi ngoyotuba. Jidena ngati rangi ngoyotuba yora. Nga siya tarire kedu kashen dinde chigdwa nga sa kashen dinde chigdwa. Chiyona shagdwa. Zuzu sari yona shagdwa. Sa nga rangu ne tuba da ngai was ngai se. Tusu yoban jidena chagde iswara. Ngai wa yoba yola se. When you read it, Tade reading by Keba Mambu, Loma Bushimbu, Chichimbresi, Sito, Nime read it and the tail Maraco, Tune the tail Mato. Nime Pushunju Longa Shebetet and the Lord to shoot and you let the tail Mara, the tail Marwa, could tune the tail Mato. So Nime reads, Nime made it a sarrow. Joachim, but it came some tongue Marwa. Oh, to listen to tea. When you Tade, when you read it, Tade read it. Jimber Jimba, Tedana, Jigdana, Traja, you have a Mahino, so Tiba the Chilam.
So here then someone has the kind of qualm thinking, well, you said that phenomena just exist by mere conceptual imputation. So can you posit as existent whatever is upheld by the world and whatever is imputed by concept? So here, if it is the kind of question that arises is then therefore does everything that is just merely conceptually imputed existent, or whatever is upheld by the world, is that existent? And so the answer is that no, it is not like that. Although something may be upheld by the world, if it is undermined by reasoning, it is not suitable to be posited as existing even conventionally. For example, in the world, one finds the apprehension of a self that is established by its essential nature and the apprehension of what belongs to that self. So we see that there are various kinds of philosophical schools and so forth that say that there is an I that really exists, whatever it is that they may point to, like this is the I, and this is an existent thing, and it exists by an essential nature and so forth, and therefore the mind and so forth would also exist in that way. And it's not the case that that is existent just because it is posited by someone. Also, there is the apprehension of a prior mountain being the mountain of the present. So, for example, we see a mountain that we have seen before, and we think, oh yeah, that mountain is still there, but it's not actually the same mountain. It's merely the same continuum, and we mistake those as being the same. Like when we have a 5-year-old kid and they're now 50, it's not as though the 5-year-old is now 50, but rather they have the same continuum. So there are certain things like our apprehension of permanence and so forth, and not understanding the sort of nature of continuums that are renowned within the world or are kind of generally accepted within the world, but it's still not suitable to be posited that those exist conventionally because they can be undermined by reasoning. So therefore, although these are upheld by the world, they do not exist in that way. So the time is up for today, so we'll stop there.
Thank you again, Rinpoche, and thank you, Katrina, very much for your skillful translation today. And for those watching online, we hope to see you again next Tuesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, and we'll finish with some dedication prayers. May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Losang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Gurata Mandalakam Nirayatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Tujuche Ginla.